I'm glad that you're all here. Michael.
I'm waiting.
I'll let you guys have questions or that, and we can,
Okay. Good evening. This is the first time I've ever done something like this with the magic eye and actual human beings. So it's, you'll excuse me if I'm a little bit uncomfortable. It's just odd. I'm really happy to be here. Just briefly, for those who don't know me, my name is Michael Raylanu. I have been in Jewish education since Moses and Aaron were in religious school. And I have lived all over Southern California, and I'm now living out here out in the 805. And it's been a pleasure for our family to have joined as Heim family, particularly with Albert Back, who we particularly like and particularly resonate to. So I'm happy to be doing this. Despite the topic, I'm happy to be here and I'm happy to be doing this. First, I want to talk about just a couple of things. First of all, Yom Hashoah, a couple of thoughts about that unto itself. You know that it's not Holocaust Remembrance Day. That is an international United Nations holiday, which comes
January.
January. That's an entirely different thing. Yom Hashoah was established by the Israeli government and was something that was established for Jews around the world to come together. The reason why it's today is the commemoration of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. They took the Passover holiday, the people who were still alive in the Warsaw Ghetto took the Passover holiday to gather together, and like the rabbis in the Haggadah, instead of talking about the Exodus, they planned their little revolution, and then shortly after Passover, they fought back, and it was remarkably successful. There was discussion originally about putting Holocaust Remembrance Day, Yom Hashoah, on Tisha B'Av. There was a real groundswell in the young state of Israel to put it on Tisha B'Av because that's a day of Jewish mourning and Jewish suffering, and it seemed appropriate. And I'm not a calendar expert, but it is my understanding that the shot that was fired that started World War I was fired on Tisha B'Av, and World War II ends up being fought. We can discuss this later. World War II ends up being fought in many ways because World War I never really ended, and the ending of World War I was poorly handled. So you could make that link, but imagine you were one of those people in the brand new state of Israel. You were living there. The Holocaust was still very fresh in people's minds. So the idea of combining with Tisha B'Av didn't go very far, and so instead we have this commemoration now. And I do have one more comment about the word Holocaust itself. I just read this today in another book on an entirely different subject, and it really got me thinking. The word Holocaust is from Greek, and what it means is to burn something up entirely in celebration. It is a sacrifice that is offered to a god, and so to call it Holocaust Remembrance Day, or refer to this event as the Holocaust, actually, as it turns out, and I just learned this today, has an interesting meaning. But the word Shoah, the Hebrew word Shoah, means to be destroyed entirely. And going forward, I think I'm going to personally try to remove the word Holocaust from my vocabulary and instead insert the word Shoah, which is, I've been saying the word Holocaust my whole life, so it probably won't happen right away. But it was really jarring, and it was in a book that was, as I said, not directly related to the Shoah, and it really, and I knew I was coming here tonight, and it really shook me. And it's just something to think about. And if anybody wants to discuss it, I'm going to give you my email later, and I'd be happy to talk about that. Okay, so let's talk about MAUS. Art Spiegelman. Okay, so here's my copy. I actually have a couple of them. I have a couple of different versions of MAUS. This is both books. MAUS is a 2-book set, generally referred to as the first book and the second book. And it is it was not Art Spiegelman's intention originally to write 2 books. He didn't know how far he was going to go, but he wanted to tell his father's story. And he started working on it, and he started sharing it with the people who you meet in the book. And he started sharing it with some of his people and some of his friends in the underground comic world. And they kind of went crazy. They said, this is unbelievably powerful. And he was encouraged then to continue. Oddly, it's not one of the things he talks about in the book. And if you've read the book, you know how much he tears his life open and shares with everyone. But the compliments and the enthusiasm, if I can use that word, that he met with originally when developing MAUS surprised him. And so that's what drove him forward to rework it. It ended up in 2 books. It is the story of Art Spiegelman's father from a town called Sosnowiec in Poland. His name is Wladek. And it tells the story of Art Spiegelman, the author, learning his father's story. It is fair to say that Art and Wladek are not a particularly close father-son pair. And Art Spiegelman was already a very famous, if you can use that word, a very famous underground comic book artist. He had no real commercial success. He had a little bit bubbled up here and there before writing MAUS. And his father, as is discussed in the book, has no clue what it is Art Spiegelman does for a living. He just doesn't understand. And that is part of the growth that comes out of the book, that they end up developing a sort of, there's a better understanding of each other as the book goes on. Art Spiegelman's mom killed herself, which is the oldest part of the entire book. The scene in which we see his mother lying dead after the suicide was originally published long before MAUS existed and was reprinted in MAUS. And as you can imagine, that was a very difficult thing for him to live through. And it colors much of his life, it colors much of the story. Wladek, the father, ends up getting remarried to a friend that they had in Poland, a woman named Mala. Not a great relationship, and it develops over the course of the 2 books. And also thrown in there is Art's wife, Françoise, who, by the way, is still around. That I recently I had the opportunity to sit in on a live discussion over Zoom with Art Spiegelman. It's the first time I've ever seen him speak live. I looked him up on the internet, but it's the first time I've seen him speak live. And one of the things he spoke of was how much Françoise was behind the growth and the development of MAUS, that she really pushed from behind the scenes and wouldn't let him give up. And you do see that a little bit in the book. So now about the book. It is a graphic novel. So it tells a story in a linear way, but at the same time, it takes advantage of all the freedom that comes from the comic book form. So it does flow 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, next page 1, 2, 1, but sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes he blows open the borders of the page. Sometimes he condenses things. Sometimes he changes the order. And that is one of the compelling things about it. When I was first introduced to it, I had never even heard of it at all. And I was working at a religious school in Greensboro, North Carolina, and I met someone who had grown up with Art Spiegelman. They had been friends as children and had been in the same bar mitzvah class. And he introduced me to MAUS. And he told me about Art Spiegelman as a kid, and he was a kind of an unusual kid and had unusual interests and things like that. And I learned about it, and then I read the book, and then I wanted to say, in all honesty, it changed my life. Reading MAUS changed my life. I say this all the time, even when people have heard it before, that in my heart of hearts, I genuinely believe that 50 or 100 or 200 years from now, when some other books about the Shoah have maybe faded away, as books do. They have their time in the sun and then they sort of fade away. I genuinely believe that MAUS will remain at the very top of the pile. I think that it is one of the 2 or 3 finest books written about it, and expresses it in a way that someone has already said to me this evening, that is so deceivingly simple and direct, because it's neither simple nor direct, and yet it is. And so that's the beauty that MAUS brings to this conversation. When I saw the interview with Art Spiegelman, he talked about his process, and he discusses it in the book, and he's still writing some comics. He's semi-retired, but he's still writing, and he is the kind of person who works on a number of different projects at once. He'll have a stack about one book and a different stack and a different stack. MAUS is the first time that the motor got turned on and he just plugged on through, that he really pursued MAUS and really tried to bring it about. You can also go online. You used to be able to buy it. It's getting harder to find. You can go online and you can actually hear the actual interviews with Vladek. You can hear his voice and hear him talk about his experiences, and you can compare it with what he said in the book. And frequently, Art Spiegelman has reproduced the entire conversation exactly as it was in the book. Sometimes there's a little creative license taken, but by and large, does exactly what Vladek said. And when you hear Vladek say it and go back to reading again, you hear his voice in the background. The power of MAUS lies in the images. So let's talk about that. Why is it called MAUS? Because the Jews are mice. The Jews are mice. When you think about mice, and that goes back to much of what Nazi Germany was teaching. Mice are vermin. Mice are unwelcome. Mice are dirty. Mice carry disease. The Nazis are portrayed as cats, which is so simple and yet so brilliant that if you want to clean your barn out of mice, you bring in a cat. And one cat can weigh about many mice. And that image, that idea is not lost in this book. The Polish people, and he got in a little trouble for this, the Polish people are pigs. And that reflects more Vladek's attitude about his non-Jewish Polish neighbors than anything really Art Spiegelman knew about Polish people. That everything, all the negative stereotypes that go with the idea of a pig is exactly what he intended for the Polish people. And there is a scene where Vladek tries to pass himself off as a Polish person, and you see the mouse of Vladek wearing a pig mask, right? Like a Halloween mask, but it's a pig on top of the mouse's face. And don't want to ruin the scene, but it doesn't work. It doesn't work, because a pig is a pig and a mouse is a mouse. And yet they're human. From here down, they are human beings. From here up, they are the mouse, that they are the animal that they are thought to be. The cutest thing, if I can say that, is that Americans are dogs, right? Loyal, Americans are beagles, actually. And again, that fits the sort of general stereotype of loyal and hardworking. And so there are other nations that are seen. There are a couple of frogs that pop up that I have to assume are French. There are some deer, and there are some other nations. I've always wanted to know what he intended. There's one scene full of different animals, and I really want to know if he has an idea for each of those nations. And you quickly get into, the idea of the willing suspension of disbelief. You quickly get into the world of mice as people, and pigs as people. And it may be jarring for the first page, maybe, but after that, it just is what it is, and you go through it, you just pursue it. So what I've done is I have selected 3 pages, randomly kind of not, that I think demonstrate the power of MAUS It's actually from the second book. It's when we are well into Vladek's retelling of his history, and he is talking about the end of the coming end of the war and how the Nazis tried to cover up what they did, and how they tried to make certain things disappear. I recently read a biography of Primo Levi, the very famous Italian survivor of Auschwitz, and he was also there. I don't know if they ever connected, I doubt it. But Primo Levi was also there as Auschwitz was being evacuated, and he tells very similar stories as to what is reflected in the book in this scene. And I chose this because the third page we're going to look at is so vital. It's so important. It's so powerful, and yet it's comic. It's a comic. It's drawn with pen and ink. If you just tweaked it a little bit, it could have been a comedy, but it's not. And so if you have your MAUS book with you, and I know some people do, because it's that kind of book, we're in the second book. The pagination that I have numbers it all the way from 1 all the way through to the end. I don't think it's the same way if you have the 2 separate volumes. Okay, so sorry, but in this book, it's page 228. If you have your MAUS, you can look at page 228, and if you don't, you can look on the screen, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Theoretically.
So how to read publicly, how to do this sort of thing publicly is always difficult. And if we were all sitting around a table, and technically we're not, by the way, if you didn't know it, we're not all in the same room. So I would assign different people different roles, and we would read together and we would talk about it. For efficiency's sake, I'm going to read the whole thing, okay? And for those of you who are following along up there or in your book, we're going to start on the second line of second set of panels, okay? So Art says, you told me about that. How many months were you in the tin shop? In this workshop, tin and shoe work combined, I was about 5 or 6 months. So black work lasted 3 months? Yeah, no, I remind myself. After black work, I came again in as tin man with you for 2 months, saying, well, wait, that would be 12 months. You said you were there a total of 10. So take less time to the black work in Auschwitz. We didn't wear watches. I was looking for you. That's Francoise, the wife. And look there on the right. Look at that thermometer. Look at that chronology. Art Spiegelman is a little bit obsessive compulsive. And the dating of things throughout the entire book is important to him. It's really important to get the dates right. His dad, he lived it, not so much. His dad lets these things flow, and a number of times in the book, that drives Art Spiegelman crazy. And here's one more example, an artistic example of how closely he paid attention to what his father was saying. Okay, the bottom of the page, Francois says, I was worried you were gone a long time. You finished then my bank papers? Said Vladek. And I made some sandwiches for lunch too. Great, I'm starving, says Art. If you made with white bread, I'm not allowed to eat. Not a real cooperative guy, that's Vladek. Such a good girl. With my special bread she knew to make. Mala wouldn't have done such a good sandwich. It was the only bread in the house. Want some tea or coffee? I can make it. I have a tea bag near the sink drying from breakfast. How did you become tin man again? Mala could go for a whole evening out with her friends and leave for me nothing cooked to eat or drink. You see how it is? I have now one more time an unnecessary suffering in my life. So how did you get back into the tin shop? When the Russians came near and the Germans made ready to run from Auschwitz, they needed tin men to pull apart the machineries of the gas chambers. They wanted to pack it all to Germany. They could take also all the Jews to finish them in quiet. The Germans didn't want to leave anywhere a sign of all what they did. You heard about the gas. I'm telling you, not rumors. but only what I really saw. For this, I was an eyewitness. And notice that last box on the page. Right? That last box on the page is just the chimney so far. Turn the page and look what you see there. And this is a comic book. I want to reiterate 100 times. This is a comic book. What should be, what is usually, a very benign and friendly and often funny and touching medium to portray an image. That's a crematorium. You are looking at a comic book image of the where people were burned. And for those of you who have had the opportunity to go to Auschwitz, you know that this map that Art Spiegelman drew is right on target, is exactly the right proportion. I don't know, I know he's been a number of times since. I don't know if he'd been there before. But look at that artwork. And Claudia continues. I came to one of the 4 Cremo buildings. It looked so like a big bakery. From the ground below in the gas room, we tin men had to take out the pipes and fans for ventilating. This was a factory to make 1, 2, 3 ashes and smoke from all what came here. And he shows you where the underground dressing rooms. You've heard of these things. We've all heard about them. But here you see them. And again, it's a comic book. I don't mean to, yes, I do. I very much mean to belabor the point. This is a comic book. This isn't Archie. This is not Donald Duck. But yet it is a comic book. Special prisoners work here separate. They got better bread, but each few months they also were sent up the chimney. One from them showed me everything how it was. Let me just toss it in aside here, that for the longest time, the people who worked in the crematorium were the Salonikaim, the Jews from the Greek island of Salonika. And why were the Salonikaim selected to work in guest years? Because they didn't speak Yiddish. And so they could not communicate, theoretically, with the other Jews. And if you've heard the story about how crematorium number 3 and 4 were partially destroyed by a group of the prisoners, that was the Salonikaim who did that. It's a very interesting story. It's a separate thing. But those were the Greek Jews who did that. They're the ones who perpetrated that. In the end, as I'm sure you know, it didn't really help very much. Crematory 3 and 4 were smaller than 1 and 2. And so it didn't exactly work, but they tried. People believed really it was here a place for showers, as they were told. And now look at the last picture we're going to look at. That is what the shower room looked like. And I know if you've been to a Holocaust museum, you have seen a picture of that room where the people were told to go in and disrobe and put your clothes here, put your shoes here, put your glasses here. There it is. There it is in a comic book. There it is. And if you hand this to a middle schooler, which I'm going to talk about in just a minute, if you hand this to a middle schooler, they get it. They understand. This drawing, as I said at the beginning, is so simple and so complex. And this is the genius of Art Spiegelman. And I don't think he appreciated his own genius at the time. Now, looking back when you hear the interview, he understands that it was a particular moment in time for him. And to finish, Vlada continues, they came to a big room to undress their clothes, but looked so. Yes, here's a place so like they say. If I saw a couple of months before how it was all arranged here, only one time I could see. So at the very end, as the Russians were trying to clean things out, and as mentioned Primo Levi, he was also involved in some of this work. And therein lies my point. Therein lies my love of MAUS. I'm not happy that the Shoah happened. Obviously, no one is. That's insane. And I'm not happy that Art Spiegelman's father had to live through it. But it did happen. And I have to say that we, the whole earth, are lucky that Art Spiegelman showed up when he did and created what he did. And now I want to talk a little bit about the controversy. On that interview that I saw Art Spiegelman, he's a very cynical guy. He's a very stereotypical, cynical New York Jewish guy with a really heavy New York accent, and he's got a very cynical sense of humor. And he's an older gentleman these days, and he maintains that very sharp edge to his humor. He's very humble about what he did, but get him on any other subject, and he's very much very stereotypical in that way. And one of the remarks I remember was he said he loves the controversy that has arisen. He said the more they complain, and he used a much stronger word, the more they complain, the thicker grows my billfold. That he, which is a very cynical way to look at it, but I think, he said that sort of with a wink and a nod, and I think he understands that it's much deeper than that. In my teaching career, I spent many years teaching middle school students. That was my wheelhouse. That was the group I preferred to teach. 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th. By the time they got to 10th, they got driver's licenses, and I went back to the bar mitzvah kids. And many different schools, I shared MAUS with them. And the controversy has arisen because there is some naughty language. There is one sort of a nude scene. As someone this evening pointed out, there is no religion to be found anywhere in this book. It's about people. It's not about God. It's not about the Jews. I mean, it happens to the Jews, but it's not about Judaism. And all of these are things that they out there don't like. They don't like the language. They don't like the tiny bit of nudity. They don't like the images of the gas chambers. They don't like that. There's one image with bodies hanging. There's one page where the whole page, even though there's dialogue around it, there are bodies hanging there. They don't like that one. There are a number of things with which they are not happy. To which I say, if you think that your 7th grader, your 8th grader, your 9th grader has not heard that language before, you are naive. Listen to the music that they listen to. And you'd be lucky if the only bad words they use were as frequent as they are in the Book of MAUS. The Book of MAUS. And as to the nudity, they probably see worse on regular TV for all I know. It's not done gratuitously. It's done as part of the scene. It's done as part of what really happened. Because in the concentration camps, there was a lot of nudity. The Jews were forced to be naked a lot. Not they didn't want to be, and in Poland in the winter, you don't want to be. But it has to be portrayed in order to tell the truth. And finally, as to religion, I often say that if a Holocaust survivor tells you they don't believe in God anymore, it's really hard to argue with that. If they speak ill of religion, it's hard to argue with that, because most of us gathered here did not experience what they did. Yes, plenty of people came out of the Holocaust and went back to their Orthodox Jewish lifestyle. And there were people of all kinds who came out. But Art Spiegelman's dad, there was no more religion in his life. There was no Judaism left in his life, none. And Art Spiegelman was raised a cultural Jew in the classic sense. His parents spoke Yiddish. They read Yiddish literature. They went to the Yiddish theater. They probably had a stake on Yom Kippur. That was the world that he grew up in, which is a very real world. And for you to turn to Vladik and tell him, don't do that, or you need to be religious, it would be unfair. And the fact that the book MAUS does not reflect that, does not reflect a religious point of view, is a particularly exact reflection of Vladik himself. He does say Kaddish for his wife after she dies. They do observe Shiva, and all of that comes up in the book. And by the way, one of the things that they talk about is he has a dream that he's going to be set free on the week of Parshat Truma. It is one of the Torah portions that comes up. in the springtime. It is the Torah portion actually. It is actually my bar mitzvah Torah portion. Truma is actually my bar mitzvah Torah portion. Make of that what you will. And so there is a discussion about Torah reading and things like that, but there is no religion, because for Vladek, there was no more religion. It just wasn't. And so the people who complain, the people who make noise are, in my opinion, are either naive or intentionally blind. If you disagree, congratulations. I'm not looking to change anybody's mind. Really, I am not looking to change anybody's mind. But to withhold this from a 7th grader or an 8th grader or a 9th grader is to do a disservice, because that is the age when they will absorb it, and they will return to it when they're in high school. They will return to it in college. For those of you who have read it, how many times have you read it again and again and again? It is that powerful. I want to open it up to questions in 1 second. I want to thank you for those of you who stuck around here, for those of you who managed to stay right here, thank you very much. I do want to mention one other book, which is also by Art Spiegelman, but I'll come back to the questions in just a minute. Okay, this one is now out of print, but you can find it in used bookstores. It's called In the Shadow of No Towers, because Art Spiegelman lived literally in the shadow of the World Trade Center. And this is his retelling of what happened that day. And it is very much in the style of underground comics. And it's another really great book. The end is a little weird for most people, but he does something. His children were at school, which was literally across the street from the World Trade Center. And he talks about that day. As powerful as his family's experience was in the Shoah, America's experience at World Trade Center, they're not, I don't think that they're equal, but the trauma that many people felt, and he discusses that in here. At one point, you see his character from MAUS reappears in this book, which is not a very subtle sign that he understands that he's the tragedy guy. And so if you don't own MAUS, you got to get a copy of it, both books. And if you can find a copy of The Shadow of No Towers, I suggest you get it too. Okay, questions, online questions, in the room questions. Anybody, anything? Questions, thoughts, ideas, comments, anybody? Anybody online? No one?
I don't see any hands.
So I got here a little late. So are there 2 books?
So it's now published as one book, but it originally was 2 separate books, and about halfway through, it
We
says.
have one hand raised. We have a hand raised. Hold on. Somebody's got their hand raised. Let me see who that is.
There is an online question.
I'm trying to find who it is.
I have a comment.
Go ahead.
So I read the book, which I really, really liked. But to me, one of the important aspects of this book was the effect that the Shoah had on the whole family after the fact. He is born after the Shoah because he's born in the U.S., but he had a brother who did not survive, and he felt he was always living in his brother's shadow.
Mm-hmm.
And his father was always reliving that. So, I mean, it's like, especially at the end when he dies, he looks at Art and calls him the brother's name. I think that, to me, that was the most powerful part of that book, was when you see that this had such a powerful effect on their future lives, of how they lived their lives and how they interacted with each other. And you see that today with a lot of the children of the survivors who said, my parents never talked about it, or my parents hoarded all the food they could get because they never knew when they weren't going to have food. That kind of thing to me was very powerful.
Right, and it continues to have an effect. There are organizations of second generation now. The third generation, I think they call it the third generation, The grandchildren now, who are adults now, who have their own experiences with that too. So you're absolutely right. It's not like by 1960 it was all over, because it wasn't, and in 2022 it's also not over. That the reverberations continue, which is part of the reason why I think that Yom Hashoah is separate from Tisha B'Av, although those events continue to reverberate as well.
Shirley raised her hand.
Shirley?
Yes, there is a belief now of trauma, family trauma, becoming genetic.
Mm.
And the idea is that the trauma that your parents suffered is something possibly genetically you pass to your children and they to their children. I don't know if that's been genetically proven, but I think if you know that your parents or your grandparents went through this, it's certainly, how can I say, it certainly will color you. And I just saw that Judy Mayer typed in to the comments that yes, it's been provenly genetically with rats down 7 generations.
Wow.
Or mice.
Nice. Right, and the Torah talks about passing things on from generation to generation. Are there any questions?
Not here.
No, okay. And ladies and gentlemen in the room and the online, thank you for your attention.
Thank you.
Will you put up my
Yeah, I
email?
will.
If you want my email, here it is on the screen. Here it is on the screen. Here it is on the screen.
I'm getting there. I'm getting
Yeah,
there.
it's coming on the screen. Please feel free to email me, to contact me. I have to say one other thing, completely off topic, which is that exactly a year ago, I had my heart attack and my heart surgery and
Why is
everything.
that much?
And Rabbi Overbeck came to see me and spend time with me and hang out and laugh at my jokes. And that sort of started my real association, my really deep association with Dave Klein. Because he was the only non-family visitor I had the whole time. And I was really touched and I really appreciated it. And I'm getting a little weepy. And I really appreciated his visit. And I don't know that I ever said that, but I did now, and it's on tape. So, you know, now it's real. Now it exists. So thank you for that. And thank you all.
Thank you, Michael.
Asha Koach, Michael.
Yes.
As we go into the evening service, we do have 6 candles light. So let's let Michael, will you help us light these candles? Is it for a match or a?
Do you trust me?
For a match or a lighter?
Could they take off the share screen?
Yeah.
Do you have the poem there too?
I've got a poem.
Should I go ahead and let him?
Yeah.
Is there a prayer that I never know if we're supposed to say something.
We're gonna have Bill Kupke lead us in Ma'adam, and we're gonna go right into the Mincha service. It might take a few of these.
Yeah.
It's a poem though that came with the candle that FJMC are sending out to you. That's something that is meant to be read while you are lighting the candles or right afterwards.
And again, not that we can at all understand what Art Spiegelman or anybody else who went through the Shoah could be thinking and how they can understand life, but there is something was written on the wall of a cellar in Cologne that says, "I believe in the sun even when it's not shining. I believe in love even when not feeling it. to believe in God, even when God is silent. There's a lot written about, and you mentioned Primo Levi. There's a lot written about where we find God in the Shoah, where we find God in the worst of times, in the worst of humanity, and what happens when we call it to God, we don't hear an answer. So I'll invite kind of one answer to that is Ma'adam. So they're going to come up here and chant Ma'adam for us, and then we'll go into Mincha, and then we'll take a little break and more poetry, and then Mari.
Let's stop after he's done.
הבוקר יציץ בחלב, הגרד ימלא בידי אש, אשר אנוש עד הקו. אומר שובו בני אדם, אך נו יזכיר זאת, יעביר אחריתם, לא במותם, ככה ירד אחריו כבודו, שמרתנו ישר, כי אחריו לאיש שלום. אדוני נפש עבדיו ולא ישפטו כל החוסים בו.